want to focus on the 45,000 dock workers threatening to strike across America's ports next week. The strike could cause empty fruit aisles and prices to soar in grocery stores.
And if this goes on long enough, one analyst claims that the strike could potentially cost the U.S. economy over $5 billion.
Listen, it might take much longer for you to get the products you want because next week a potential labor strike at East and Gulf Coast ports could leave ships filled with billions of dollars worth of goods stranded.
Something massive just happened in West Africa, and almost nobody saw it coming. Ghana has taken a decision so bold, so unexpected, that it's shaking global trade from Washington to Beijing, and it's sending a message the whole world can feel. For years, African nations have been forced to pay sky-high U.S.-controlled shipping fees that quietly drained billions from African economies, raised the price of imported goods, and kept the continent dependent on Western routes. Most countries accepted it, most stayed silent, but Ghana didn't. In a shocking move, Ghana just blocked U.S.-imposed shipping fees and unveiled a new African trade route that could save the continent billions of dollars every single year. And now Washington is scrambling to understand how Africa pulled this off and what it means for America's influence on global trade. This isn't just economics. It's power, it's independence, it's Africa refusing to be controlled. Because when Ghana shut the door on U.S. fees, it opened the door to a future where African goods move on African routes, African ports control African trade, and African countries stop paying billions to systems that were never built for their benefit. Today, we dive deep into how Ghana did it, why America is furious, and how this single decision could change the price of food, fuel, and everyday products for millions across Africa. This is the story Washington never wanted Africa to tell, and now the whole world is watching. For decades, Africa has been tied to a global shipping system that it did not design, did not vote for, and did not fully benefit from. A system dominated by Western nations, especially the United States, where African countries often paid some of the highest shipping and logistics fees in the world. These fees quietly drained billions from African economies. They increased the cost of food, fuel, medicine, vehicles, and even basic goods like cooking oil and spare parts. But for years, there was no alternative. African nations relied on routes created by Europe and the United States. Goods coming from Asia were processed through Western-controlled ports. Cargo leaving Africa passed through systems owned by foreign companies. Africans paid fees that never came back to the continent, and for many that was simply the way the world worked until now. Because Ghana, a nation known for its independence, its boldness, and its willingness to challenge global systems, has done something few expected. With one decision, Ghana blocked U.S. shipping fees and launched a new African-centered trade route that analysts say could save the continent billions of dollars every single year. A move that has shaken Washington, a move that has forced the world to rethink Africa's place in global trade, and a move that could mark the beginning of a new era. The story begins at the port of Tema, one of the busiest and most advanced ports in West Africa. For years, Tema was a transit point for goods moving in and out of the continent, but it was heavily tied to Western logistics networks. Shipping lines owned by U.S. and European companies dominated traffic. They set the rules, they controlled the fees, and they knew that Africa had no choice but to pay. But over the past decade, something quietly changed. Ghana expanded and modernized its ports. It invested in scanners, cranes, logistics software, and deepwater terminals. It built capacity not just for Ghana, but for the entire region. And slowly, quietly, the balance of power began to shift. Behind the scenes, African nations started complaining about the excessive costs. Importers in Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, and Angola reported logistics expenses far higher than Latin America or Asia. In many cases, goods passing through U.S.-linked routes carried multiple layers of fees that had nothing to do with Africa but everything to do with Western control. Ghana watched all of this, and Ghana decided enough was enough. So when the United States pushed a new shipping fee standard that African nations were expected to adopt a policy that would increase costs for African importers while boosting U.S. revenue, Ghana refused. Not only refused, but publicly blocked the policy. The announcement stunned Western analysts. A U.S. trade representative said the move was unexpected and problematic. Washington began pressing for explanations. Some American companies even warned that Ghana was endangering established global trade frameworks. But Ghana didn't back down. Instead, it explained why. Ghana argued that the U.S. shipping fee structure unfairly burdened African nations, slowed African trade growth, and kept Africa dependent on systems that benefited the West more than the continent itself. Ghana presented data showing that African importers were paying up to 45% more than global averages. They showed how these fees inflated prices for African consumers. They showed how farmers, entrepreneurs, and traders were losing billions because of unnecessary charges. And then Ghana revealed something Washington didn't see coming. A new African trade route built with African partners that bypassed US-controlled systems entirely. This route connected ports in Ghana, Senegal, Morocco, CTE d'Ivoire, and Mauritius with direct links to major global shipping hubs in Asia, the Middle East, Latin America, and emerging African free trade corridors. For the first time, African nations could choose a path that didn't run through foreign-controlled bottlenecks. For the first time, Africa could move goods with African coordination, African pricing, and African priorities. This wasn't just a shipping decision, it was a declaration. Africa would no longer be treated as a destination market for Western profits. Africa would no longer pay inflated fees to maintain foreign systems. Africa would no longer accept a place at the bottom of the global logistics structure. The economic impact was immediate. Simulations showed Africa could save nearly $3 billion per year through reduced shipping fees alone. Ghanaian businesses reported lower freight charges within weeks. Importers finally had access to a predictable African-controlled system. Farmers exporting cocoa, cashew, pineapple, and shea products saw logistics costs drop. Small businesses moving goods within ECOWAS felt the difference instantly. But perhaps the biggest beneficiaries were African consumers because lower shipping costs meant lower prices on essential goods. Analysts predicted that food prices in parts of West Africa could drop by up to 12%. Fuel prices could stabilize. Technology imports, car parts, pharmaceuticals, and even construction materials could become cheaper, and this was just the beginning. Washington, on the other hand, did not take the news lightly. The U.S. had long depended on its dominance in global shipping logistics to maintain influence in developing markets. Losing Africa, especially a key gateway like Ghana, meant losing leverage, losing revenue, and losing strategic control. American companies warned of market instability. U.S. officials quietly asked Ghanaian diplomats if the decision could be reversed. Some Western media painted Ghana's move as risky and rebellious. But in Africa, the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. Kenya praised Ghana for taking a stand. South Africa called the move a sign of continental maturity. Nigeria proposed expanding the route into a full West African logistics corridor. Zambia, Rwanda, and Tanzania expressed interest. Even smaller markets like Benin and Togo saw the potential. It wasn't just Ghana's decision, it was Africa's new direction. Because the truth is, the world has changed. Africa is no longer isolated, African. Ports are expanding. African digital logistics systems are evolving. The African Continental Free Trade Area (AFTA) is gaining momentum. New alliances with Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East are growing stronger. And African countries are finally realizing that dependency is a choice and so is independence. Ghana's move is part of a broader trend across the continent. Nigeria rejecting foreign oil dominance. Kenya adopting alternative currency settlements. South Africa building independent payment systems. Angola prioritizing local energy refining. Ethiopia investing in domestic wheat. Botswana protecting its diamond market. And now Ghana disrupting global shipping economics. One by one, African nations are rewriting the rules. For everyday Africans, this is more than politics. This is about the price of food on the table, the cost of transportation, the burden on small businesses, the future of young entrepreneurs, and the dignity of nations that are tired of paying for systems that do not serve them. The next phase of this story is even more powerful. Experts say Ghana's boldness could lead to a continental shipping alliance. Standardized African freight rates, Africa-owned cargo fleets, new deepwater ports, and integrated African logistics platforms. If this happens, Africa could save tens of billions every decade, money that stays in African economies instead of flowing to foreign corporations. And that is the real reason this story matters. Because sometimes the biggest economic revolutions don't happen on the battlefield or in the parliament. They happen at the port, they happen in the shipping lane. They happen when one country decides the old rules no longer make sense and chooses a new path. Ghana chose that path, and Africa is watching, learning, and preparing to follow in the decades to come. Historians may look back and say that the shift in African economic independence did not begin with a speech or a conflict, but with the moment Ghana blocked U.S. shipping fees and opened a route that changed everything. Because this isn't just a story about trade, it's a story about pride, about sovereignty, about continent-wide courage. About a future where Africa controls its wealth, its goods, its markets, and its destiny. And today, that future feels closer than ever. And as we step back from everything Ghana just triggered, you begin to realize this story isn't just about shipping fees. It isn't just about trade routes or port charges or who controls the ocean lanes. This is about something far deeper. For decades, African nations were told who to trade with, what prices to accept, what systems to follow, and what rules were good for them. The U.S. shaped the shipping world in a way that benefited America first, and Africa always had to adjust, pay higher fees, accept longer routes, lose money on every shipment. That was normal. That was just the way things were. But now, suddenly, a new Africa is saying, no more. Ghana's decision to block U.S.-controlled shipping fees and embrace a cheaper African-centered trade route is more than a policy change. It's a declaration of identity, a declaration of pride, a declaration of economic independence. You can feel the shift everywhere, from Accra to Addis Ababa, from Dar es Salaam to Dakar. Governments are waking up to the same truth. Africa loses billions every year not because it lacks resources, but because it plays by rules written by others. This new trade route isn't just a shortcut, it isn't just a cost-saving plan. It is a message that African countries no longer want to be passengers in the global economy. They want to be drivers. And what makes it so emotional, so powerful, is that ordinary people, not just presidents, ministers, or CEOs, will feel this impact. Cheaper goods, lower transport costs, more predictable timelines, more African jobs. This decision is going to touch farmers, traders, shop owners, fishermen, factory workers, logistics companies, drivers, mechanics, people whose names never appear in headlines but whose lives are shaped by decisions made thousands of miles away, for the first time in a long time. Africa is choosing its own path. Meanwhile, in America, this move lands like a thunderbolt. Washington is worried, deeply worried. Not because of Ghana alone, but because of the message it sends. If one nation can break away from a US-dominated shipping system, others can too. And if more African countries join this new trade route, billions of dollars in American shipping profits disappear instantly. This is why American companies are panicking. This is why US officials are calling emergency meetings. This is why you will see angry headlines, frustrated statements, and emotional reactions on American TV, because Ghana didn't just save money. Ghana broke a pattern. A pattern where Africa pays more so others can earn more. A pattern where African trade is rooted through systems that were never built for Africa's benefit. A pattern where global powers make the rules and Africa follows them. But that era is fading. And every time Africa takes a bold step, whether it's building its own tech, refining its own oil, creating its own banking systems, producing its own fertilizers, or now controlling its own trade routes, the world shifts slightly. You can feel it, you can feel the tension, you can feel the pride. You can feel the rise of a continent that has carried the world's resources but never controlled the world's wealth. This is bigger than Ghana, bigger than one deal. Bigger than one conflict with the US. This is part of a new African awakening. A moment where the continent finally realizes, why should we pay billions to foreign systems when we can build our own? And once Africa starts building its own systems, it becomes unstoppable. So as we close this story, remember, every major global shift starts with a decision that seems small at first. A port, a route, a fee, a policy. But history is made of these small decisions. And today, Ghana didn't just choose a cheaper path, it chose a freer path. A path where Africa protects its money, its economy, and its future. A path where African voices decide African destiny. A path that makes global powers uncomfortable, because they can no longer predict Africa's next move. If this is what Ghana can spark with one decision, imagine what the whole continent can change when all 54 countries move together. The world is shifting and Africa is no longer in the background. Africa is on the stage now. Africa is speaking loudly, and the world cannot ignore it. This is just the beginning.